The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Now, if you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And for all the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Exonation, my guest this hour is Robert Kopecky. He survived a traumatic childhood and then traveled extensively, living a variety of lives, until becoming an award-winning illustrator, art director, and animation designer for the New York Times, PBS Kids, and many others. His unusual path was punctuated by 3 dramatic, distinctly different near-death experiences, all of which he obviously survived. Joining me now is Robert Kopecky. And Robert, welcome to the X Zone.
Well, thanks very much, Rob. It's nice to be back on the X Zone.
It's nice having you with us again, my friend. Tell our listeners who didn't hear your interview with us the last time about the traumatic experiences that you had that led you to writing your book.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, the traumatic part of that was my childhood, which was difficult, and from that, I kind of spun off into a life of a searcher, in a way, and lived all these different kinds of lives and had different careers and stuff before settling down in the art world. But I'd been working as an artist, as an illustrator, and an art director in Los Angeles, and was living there with my first wife when my first near-death experience happened. And that was a single car accident that happened on an unfamiliar stretch of road when I had a malfunction of my cassette player, which I should tell you around when that took place. It was back in the mid-'80s. And I glanced off an oddly parked car while I was messing around with my broken tape and went straight into a telephone pole going 35 or 40 miles an hour and broke out the windshield with my head and broke the steering wheel with my face, unfortunately. And the very next instant, I found myself at the top of the light pole that I hit, basically looking down at the scene of the wrecked car. And I saw a body kind of hanging out of it. And I could look over hedges and bushes into people's yards and see people running out. And they called an ambulance, and I watched them load who I realized was me into the ambulance. I never felt alone. I felt as though there were a presence with me. I felt completely liberated from my sort of material body and material constraints, and had that experience that many near-death experiencers have of being enfolded in this kind of expansive, illuminative matrix of loving intelligence, kind of, being hugged by God, kind of. And then I was shepherded off to to sort of a pastoral place, kind of like nature or a park or something, as I recall, and had a kind of an interview with an entity that I can't really describe to you. I try not to elaborate on some of these memories because they're pretty old now, but just to give it to you like I really remember it as having happened. And we discussed important things. I can't remember exactly what, but I think it was about, who I had been and what I could be, that sort of thing. And I came to about 20 hours after the original accident in a hospital with my head heavily bandaged, and returned back a week and a half or so later to examine the neighborhood, and discovered that I really could see back into people's yards and stuff, things that I couldn't have seen from the street level at all. And I confirmed that having been out of body. So I call that out of body experience the gift of perspective.
What was it like? How did you feel when you realized that you were actually had died, had a near-death experience, and that the scenery that you saw when you were having this experience was real, and you had experienced the real thing? How did you feel?
Well, it was interesting because back in those days, there was not a great deal of interest. There weren't any well-known near-death experiencers to speak of, and the people that had first started studying it, like Dr. Raymond Moody or Kenneth Ring or PMH Atwater, I think they just had their first books out, and not many people knew about it. So when I described this first to my wife at the time and to other friends at the time too, they just kind of looked at me funny, you know. Nobody really was on board with it. They thought I had hit my head awfully hard, which of course I had.
Sure.
But I didn't find a community of like-minded experiences or anything like that, so I basically just went back into my regular life and kind of suppressed it.
How long did it take before you were able to talk about it openly?
It was many, many years later, because I had my second near-death experience then, probably 6 or 7 years later. I had been traveling a lot. Like a lot of near-death experiencers, I had trouble sort of fitting into my life after that out-of-body experience. And my first wife and I traveled around the world, going to a lot of kind of spiritual places, ruins and temples and the like, without really thinking we were spiritual people at all. When we came back to the United States, I was present at the bedside of a dear aunt of mine when she died. She'd been very important in my childhood, and that knocked me kind of out of my tracks even further. And I ended up leaving my marriage and going to New York City and living this kind of nocturnal, self-destructive lifestyle for a while that led to this experience I had, where I basically, just as kind of cascading toxic effects of my life, I collapsed on the floor of my apartment and was essentially paralyzed from the neck down. And at the same time, a brilliant white cloud filled into the room. And once again, I was liberated from my kind of material, physical self. I felt completely free and wonderful, really, like I was enfolded and supported in this kind of field of love. And not alone again, as though somebody were telling me to look in this particular direction, and in the midst of this cloud, a kind of a screen opened up. There was sort of like a three-dimensional box of time, is how I remember it, and it began to play these scenes, these very sort of pivotal moments, not wonderful memories, not the best hits, the greatest hits, real. And I witnessed these 4 or 5, maybe 6 of these scenes that I only have sketchy memories of, but I realized in that instant that everything happens in our life in this moment, and that I call the gift of presence. With that, the woman that I was with at the time was very, very upset, and I could hear her screaming, and her voice kind of entered into this whole scene, and it faded out, and I was back on the floor of my apartment. That was just an hour or two in its entire passage. But I came back with that gift of presence. That's what I call it in the new book.
Tell me about your third near-death experience.
That occurred a number of years later. I still didn't have anybody to really talk to about this, and I didn't really search people out. I was really in the grips of kind of my material life. I didn't know how to fit this in with what I was trying to do in my life, and I ended up blowing relationships and leaving town. I left New York City and moved out to the desert in Arizona to kind of try to get a hold of things. And I met somebody there and ended up getting engaged. I was going back and forth between New York and this small town in Arizona when I was on a payphone in this small town and was attacked by a skinhead. Like a big guy who seemed kind of intoxicated, and he started to assault me sort of violently, and I got in a scuffle with him. And when I made good my escape, I didn't realize there was a whole van full of these guys, and I was on a bicycle. They drove up alongside of me and hit me in the back of the head with maybe a crowbar or something like that.
Good Lord.
Knocked me head first into the curb, and then according to the police report, they proceeded to stomp and kick me for the worst part of an hour or so. And in that one, I was, again, launched into this extra-dimensional experience. This time I had a little more sense of the physical reality around me, but I was in a very safe, warm place. It wasn't as celestial as the other two times. It was a little bit more like subterranean almost. But I was surrounded by a group of other entities that pushed me back into life because I had not fulfilled my purpose. All
right, we're going to have to take a little bit of break here, and when we come back, we'll continue with our very special guest this hour, Exonation. Robert Kopecky is his name, and his website is www.robertkopecky.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We'll be back after this break. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Robert Kopecky is my guest this hour, Exonation, www.robertkopecky.com, and we're talking about Robert's book, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. Once again, robertkopecky.com. Now, Robert, in the 3 near-death experiences that you had, were there many similarities?
Well, there were similarities to other near-death experiences. You know, each one, the out-of-body experience, the life review, and the being forced back into life. As I was explaining, I was kind of like pushed back into this world, so to speak, which gave me the gift of what I call the gift of purpose. Those 3 formats are things that a lot of near-death experiencers share. Mm-hmm. The details of all of near-death experiences are often quite different. And I suppose that if I had gone to the same place in each of my 3 near-death experiences, I would have just expected that heaven was a particular location, or like going to another location on a different planet or something in a different dimension. But what it really was these kind of teaching episodes that were created by where I was in my life. So the near-death experiences are really custom-made to their experiencers. You know, as I've studied about it and become part of the community of near-death experiencers that I've inadvertently, really over the last couple of years since the first book, I've discovered a lot of things about these and heard a lot of stories. And, you know, a lot of them really depend on who the person is and what their cultural upbringing is. And, in fact, near-death experiences have a certain kind of exclusivity in that regard. You know, Christians will have Christian experiences, and Hindus will have Hindu experiences, and Buddhist experiences, that sort of thing. And so we apparently have some kind of pattern recognition or some kind of information or data about ourselves that we take across into this other dimension, and then we use to report on when we come back, these kind of archetypes or symbols or aspects of our culture and our personal experience.
Do you think that these near-death experiences are part of our voyage through life, and that these are planned events?
Well, you know, I imagine that they probably are in a way, because of that second near-death experience I had, the life review, where I witnessed these sort of boxes of time, you know, these moments that had passed many years before that I hadn't been really present for. Like, clearly it seems that, you know, there is a relationship to time that is experienced in a completely different way in other dimensions. That here we experience it as a function of our biological form, but in other dimensions, I believe that we're extra-dimensional beings, obviously, that time and space are completely different things. And so all of these things, I think, can be put together in that kind of a way at one time. And I think that explains things like synchronicities, too, for example, in your life, where you'll meet somebody and it seems like you know them already, and there's some meaningful coincidence that's very powerful, that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of evidence for what you're saying, yeah.
You know, while your 2 books talk about near-death, dying, and the afterlife, they really seem to be more about how to live this mortal life. Why is that?
Well, because I didn't notice that big of a difference, to tell you the truth. I mean, there are aspects of these other lives that I entered into that are fantastic and kind of surrealistic, and there is that experience of this transcendent sense of total connectedness and this innate understanding of my purpose and that feeling of being enfolded into this kind of field of love and stuff like that. But I was still alive there. I was still obviously sort of seeing it through my own eyes. So moving from one to the other or back was really just kind of like stepping into a room. So whatever life we are living, we have the opportunity to experience those heavenly feelings, those kind of feelings we associate with heaven, or hellish feelings for that matter, and that certainly can happen in this life. I think most of us have had tastes of each of that, and this book is really about how to align yourself with those experiences that we consider heavenly.
But for those of us who have not had a near-death experience, how do we validate its very existence?
Well, you know what, that's a difficult thing to say because, of course, all spiritual experience is essentially anecdotal in nature. You know, there really isn't any spiritual experience that isn't just brought back by the experiencer, whether it's a near-death experience or some other kind, astral travel or remote viewing of things or transpersonal communications with people, these remarkable coincidences and the like. You know, they really are very difficult to document entirely. So an awful lot of it just it has to do with, I think, the volume of it. You know, there are millions of near-death experiencers. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, did a study at his hospital in the Netherlands, and of 2,500 people, I think it was, and determined about 15% of cardiac arrest patients have near-death experiences, of some of them of the same motifs that mine were.
So, having done research into the near-death experience with the different associations and having written your book, is there a common thread between those who have had the near-death experiences? And have you done any research into those who have had traumatic accidents, who have not had near-death experiences, as to come to a basic conclusion on why some people do and some people don't?
No, you know, I can't really figure that out for sure, why that happens or why it doesn't for different people. The thing that does seem obvious to me, given, and really I can only speak from my own experiences, is that each one was uniquely tailored. It was sort of custom made to where I was in my life, what I was possibly open to experience in a way.
I see.
And so I entered into these kind of places of extra dimensionality where I was shown things, and part of each experience was this kind of authenticity or humility that allowed me to become teachable and receive this kind of guidance. That's a big part, I think, of the afterlife experience for a lot of people. But why certain people will have them and others won't, I don't know. I know a guy who was in a coma for a couple of weeks, and he's fascinated by the fact that I had 3 experiences, and he didn't have any. He was just out. He was unconscious. He doesn't remember anything of having any kind of extra-dimensional activity whatsoever, or even dreams for that matter. So it's a mystery to me, but, you know, the whole thing is really kind of a mystery.
Is it possible that one's belief in spirituality has a big part that plays in a near-death experience?
Well, I've asked myself that question a number of times, but I didn't really have a spiritual upbringing in any institutional or traditional way. I didn't go to church at all as a kid. My parents didn't take me. I wasn't really exposed to this kind of overt spirituality like psychics or anything like that in my family or in my experience. I was drawn my whole life to places that turn out to have spiritual significance. You know, I explored the Mayan underworld before it was on ecotourists' itineraries a long, long time ago, and looked for tiki in the South Pacific and went to these temples and cathedrals and stuff. I was a fan in my youth of Carlos Castaneda. I grew up on the border with Mexico in eastern San Diego County. And so I was kind of aware of a lot of these sort of spiritual approaches of indigenous people and the like. But I didn't really have a great grounding in it, certainly not enough to create some kind of hardwired spiritual data bank that would activate when I had these catastrophes happen.
Right.
I really feel like I was knocked out of this life and into an extra-dimensional experience of another life. I mean, still basically the same life, but someplace else and in another kind of form.
Stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Robert, thank you very much for joining us. Very interesting topic. And Exonation, if you'd like more information about our guest, Robert Kopecky, and how you can find out how you can get your very own copy of How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying, visit Robert's website at www.robertkopecky.com. That's www.robertkopecky.com. And for all of you who've been sending me emails right, left, and center about when is the next edition of the X Chronicles newspaper going to be available online at www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com, the answer is this weekend, my friends. And as always, the X Chronicles newspaper is free of charge. That's right, we want as many people as possible to read it. Please share it with your friends. 92 full-colored pages. And once again, that website is www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. And I'd also like to say hello to all our friends listening to us right now in St. Helens, Oregon on AM 1600 KOHI. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Robert Kopecky and I will be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
Broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond. You're watching the X Zone Broadcast Network. www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Demo.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school, training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Robert Kopecky is our special guest, www.robertkopecky.com, and he's the author of How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. And Robert, the subtitle, Without Really Dying, where does that come into the picture?
That's the important part, I think. That's the most important part for readers. Certainly, I don't want anybody to follow my example, but just to explore the book and the means that I have for getting us to that kind of state of being that I'm talking about, engaging in the true spiritual nature that I discovered in these near-death experiences, and then being able to experience life with less fear and more grace and more joy, having those feelings of being supported, part of an expansive field of this illuminative, loving intelligence that's available to us every once in a while. We can maybe grow that in our lives, and developing a transcendent sense of total connectedness and an understanding of the sort of sacred nature of all of life, and removing the obstacles to the things we want to do and to experiencing love, that kind of stuff. So it's available to us here without having to go to all the trouble I went to. But it does seem that our soul does seem to require a death experience to go to heaven, and that's not necessarily an actual death experience where something terrible happens to you physically or a disease or something, but also these kinds of passages, I think, in our life where we lose something of great importance, a relationship, or somebody dies, or we lose a job or have to move from someplace. We go through these sorts of passages in our life that sometimes ground us back in our sort of authentic self without any of the trappings that we thought. That's what happened to me. The 3 near-death experiences didn't really do it incredibly. Didn't make the big change in my life. It was a couple years after the third one where sort of everything in my life kind of fell apart and stopped working, and I had this dark night of the soul, so to speak. And I came out of the other side of that in a more sort of authentic state with maybe a little more real humility, which I think is what these death experiences give us, and what's kind of necessary to experience heaven. There are certain things, like, what do you think of when you think of heaven, Rob?
Well, personally, yeah, I think of a staircase going up. I think of what I've been taught as a Christian, where there's the gate, the Golden Gates. You've got St. Peter there, and he's going to look at his book, and he's going to say, wait a minute, we've got to go to the library and get your 14,000 volumes out here, McConnell. and he'll take several years going through, thumbing, and he'll say, I don't know about this. And then a guard,
on page 12,000.
Yeah, and then of course you go. The gates open up. You go in, and you're greeted by your departed loved ones, both animal and human. And I don't know. Instead of a harp, I sure hope I can get a guitar, because I can't play a harp, but I can play a guitar. But I think it all depends on the way that you were taught and your perception of heaven as you were led to believe as a child.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that those things are true. The experiences that I had were very realistic. They were very real. And the experiences that I hear from other near-death survivors, it's the same thing, regardless of how different the details might be.
Right.
So I think that you will and do bring the package of information that you are karmically to the experience of the next world. But aside from there being a staircase and a gate and those kinds of particular trappings, I think that also what's common with all of this are this great feeling of love, of this absolute kind of field of love. And for me, I know without having had St. Peter's Gate and stuff like that as a convention to go by, I always imagined that everybody in heaven would be really nice, and that everybody would be honest, everybody would be humble and forgiving and compassionate, and everybody would help you without any concern about getting anything out of it, that there would be a spirit of service kind of. And so I propose in the book, in the first part, to achieve the kind of spiritual perspective of heaven, of this experience of heaven, and to help bring it into our lives here, that if we follow those kinds of principles that we might consider to be heavenly characteristics, like kindness and honesty and humility and forgiveness and compassion and service, that we can recreate or create a sense of that here and now.
Let me ask you something, my friend. When you had your first and second experiences, and the interest in near-death experience wasn't as well known as it is today, how did you cope with that frustration? That, here you had this experience that was not publicly known by so many, and yet here you had an experience, a life-changing experience, a life-altering experience. How did you cope?
Yeah, it's funny because I used to say that they didn't change me very much, those experiences. Mm-hmm. But looking back on it now with what I know, I realize that they really did have a tremendous effect on me. And the fact was, it was frustrating. It was very aggravating.
I would imagine so.
After the first one, there was nobody that I could really talk to. I felt like it was something that I experienced on my own and that I would have to deal with on my own. The implications of it were kind of too large for me to wrap my arms around or to incorporate into my life at the time. And I think I might have defaulted to a very material kind of a life as a result of it. I kind of snapped back the other direction, to try to suppress it and grab a hold of sensory experiences. I wanted to kind of live bigger and have more, and I became sort of more materialistic in a way. And as that didn't work for me either, to find this kind of heaven in my heart that we're talking about, and then the second near-death experience happened, I was pretty knocked out of my tracks in a lot of ways. That's probably why I ended up having this dark night of the soul, is because my life really kind of fell apart. My career seemed to end. My second marriage ended. A lot of my friends were out of my life. I was in a place that I hadn't imagined I would ever be, that just wasn't my fantasy ever. And I found myself having to rearrange my world based on a kind of a absolute humility that I reached at that point. So that was the kind of ego death that I think I required, and so that was the way that I ended up dealing with it. From that point on, my life turned around. I became a meditator, and all these things I never dreamt of, right? I started studying ancient texts and stuff and almost became essentially religious and started volunteering in a hospital and meditating all the time, and I became a vegetarian. Just like a complete transformation took place after that.
So it sounds like your near-death experience was actually a rebirth experience.
Well, yeah, it was, and it's interesting around this around Easter time because I'll have people say to me, "Oh, hey, resurrection, aren't you Mr. 3 times?" kind of thing. And I have to say that the Easter time and the resurrection experience for me is that of a metaphysical nature. It was what happened when clinging to the forms of this world, to sensory experience and material possessions and things like that, did not work for me anymore. The sort of horizontal experience of life like that stopped working for me. And it's kind of like the cross at Easter. There's a horizontal temporal aspect, a material aspect, and then there's the vertical in the cross
that
points towards heaven. And that was then what picked me up and carried me to this kind of transcending the delusion of separateness, so to speak, where I became to feel at one with everything, and a kind of a peace and grace and joy in my life that I'd never had before.
A lot of the people that I've had the pleasure of speaking to who have had near-death experiences all tell me that they fear death no more.
Yes, that's true. I don't fear death, but please don't ask me to prove it right now.
No, I'll take your word for it.
Because I am in human form, and I'm, as this is the thing, is the form of being human mitigates all the experience here, and it's a great part of our instinct to want to stay alive and to fear death. So it's not that I don't fear death, because I do. I'm not looking forward to any of that again, although I do know what's on the other side, so to speak. I've peeked behind the curtain a couple of times, and I know that we were alive before we're born and will be alive after we die. It's just that when I'm in human form, I naturally experience the instincts of a human.
You and I have to take our final break. I was going to ask you a question, but I think it would be better spent on the other side. This way here, I don't have to interrupt you. Robert Kopecky is our special guest, X-Zone Nation. www.robertkopecky.com is his website, and we're talking to Robert this hour about near-death experiences, as well as his new book entitled How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. Once again, his website is www.robertkopecky.com. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and once again, for our good friends at the Digital Broadcast Network, they're looking for psychics, mediums, tarot card readers, and all other practitioners of the divination arts for a new TV series that they are working on. And if you'd like to apply or put in your information to the casting call, go to www.digitalbroadcastnetwork.ca.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howell will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multi-family dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. Former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes. finds a locket or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
Hey, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, as we take this fascinating trip across the cosmos to a place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard, and we're heard around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and iHeartRadio. X Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Robert Kopecky. His website is robertkopecky.com. And we're talking to Robert about his book, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. And first of all, Robert, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a great pleasure talking to you. When it comes to the other people who have had near-death experiences, who contact you, who are able to share their stories with someone who understands what they've gone through and what they're going through, how can you best help them?
You know, it's great to be around those people. You know, that was something, like I mentioned, it was completely inadvertent for me. I had not even thought about becoming part of a near-death community.
Well, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there when you say, is it possible that this was all part of the plan in order for you to have this experience? You're a very artistic person, and I have found that those who have a talent as an artist, a musician, a writer, a poet, a musician, have more of these experiences than anyone else because they can better relate the experiences. So is it possible that the 3 death experiences that you had were no accident, but they were part of a plan so that you, Robert Kopecky, would have the ability to help these people and to help others who may not have yet had a near-death experiences, but who might experience one?
Well, yeah, sure. Of course I believe that. And I go into that in the third part of the book, the purpose part of the book, based on the being forced back into life because I hadn't done it right and there were things I needed to do, you know, that we all have this kind of mission that we have been tailoring, that we have been custom building with our creation of our life karma, kind of the causes and effects. And for a lot of people, it seems like they're stumbling around. I certainly did for a long time, stumble around with what my purpose was in this life. But I think in many ways that it's right in front of us. You know, I started having these experiences with other near-death survivors, and with people dealing and coping with death, or with oncoming death, or with the death of loved ones. I've worked with people like that too, quite a bit. And there it is. It's right in front of you. You know. What are you good at? What form of expression is natural to you that people appreciate and want you to do? What do people want you to do for them? What do they ask of you? What are your responsibilities? What are your great life responsibilities calling you to be to people that you love in your life or that are expecting or needing your help and assistance? Whether they're parts of your family or somebody you just meet on the street, there's always this opportunity for us to express this kind of loving divine consciousness that we're all part of, and to evolve, to grow, to expand our consciousness, and to hopefully bring that into the world and pick others up with us, and then to experience love, which of course I think is at the bottom of everything, pretty much.
How has the experiences that you've had, the near-death experiences, changed your life? What are some of the most dramatic changes that you yourself, Robert, have noticed in your life that would not have been made if it not had been for these 3 near-death experiences?
Well, as I mentioned, Rob, my my life completely turned around and became a totally different thing than what it had been. It really turned 180 degrees around, and I started experiencing it in a whole different way. And a lot of that has to do with these three lessons that I'm using all the time in my life right now to have that kind of experience with heaven. And that is the spiritual perspective that I got from that first experience, where I'm able to witness people as spirits coming through the vehicle of their human form, this package of experience and wonderful things and terrible things and, their needs and wishes. I can witness that with kind of a compassionate neutrality. And then that presence, the gift of presence, the realization that everything always has happened right now, right in this moment. This is when I have the opportunity to connect with you and to connect with your audience and to make something actually happen in my life, right? And it's always been that way and always will be that way. And then my life is showing me why I'm here all the time. Life is not happening to me, it's happening for me, so that I can express these talents or skills or wants and wishes, desires, all these things that I have that want to come through me, so that perspective and that presence and that purpose are probably the things that have changed my life more than anything else, because I'm always experiencing life with those three things in mind.
In your book, you point out that ancient texts have always been describing their own paths to heaven. How is that important to us nowadays, Robert?
Oh, well, I think it's fantastic, because of that the gift of presence where, I'm sitting in some cloud looking at these boxes of time from my life. I realize that everything in human experience has always been the same. If you and I could be having this conversation wearing togas right now, right? We probably did. We weren't on the radio, but we might have been sitting around in some forum in Greece having the same conversation. And of course, human experience has the same validity and had the same validity in those moments. When you read that stuff, like in the book, I have the Bhagavad Gita and the Dhammapada and the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, and then the poetry of Rumi I include too. And looking at little pieces of that text that describes this experience of an extra-dimensional spiritual nature and these kinds of courses or paths to heaven, it's quite phenomenal how accurate and how timely they are for us right now. The ancient Upanishads essentially describe quantum physics. It's quite remarkable how meaningful even ancient texts can be for this effect in our life,
Another thing, you mentioned experience divine consciousness. How is this different from the neuroscience of consciousness as we all experience it?
Yeah, that's interesting too to me because there's been a lot of talk about near-death experience being simply hypoxia or the result of a brain, the neuroanatomy of a brain shutting down, that kind of thing. And I'm sure that to some degree that is true, and I do believe that each of our brains independently is producing some consciousness to speak of. But what they call the hard question in science is how does consciousness and life animation enter into essentially inert matter, like me, for example, or anything we look at. And I believe that our brains, which are still not understood very well, despite all the great advances that we're making all the time, I think our brains are doing much more than we know they are. I believe that they're not just creators of consciousness, but they're also receivers and transmitters and projectors of consciousness, because I experienced a brainless consciousness, so to speak, where I was part of a larger mind. I was part of a seamless greater intelligence, which I consider to be divine consciousness, and which is called a lot of things by a lot of other people, the matrix or the ground of being, or, the kingdom of heaven, God's mind, for example.
So what's next for you, Robert? What are you going to be doing next?
I'm very soon I'm going to be speaking down at the Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment, April 14th. I'll be down there talking about the book and sharing a good time with some other near-death experiencers and stuff. That's in Virginia Beach, April 14th. And I've got a couple other conferences coming up, and I'm always writing on my blog, which is robertkopecky.blogspot.com. And, I'm keeping my Facebook author page up to date, and so I'm always trying to be in touch with people and continue writing and continue to try to share my experiences and be of service to people if I can be.
Well, our time is coming to an end very quickly, Robert. So what I'd like you to do is let our listeners know once again where they can buy a copy of your book, your website, and your blog spot.
Yeah, how to get to heaven without really dying. That's the important part.
Yes.
And How to Survive Life and Death, my first book, are available, everywhere. You can order them online, and they're at bookstores. You can order them that way. robertkopecky.blogspot.com. I'm always posting pieces there, and I write for The Mindful Word and sometimes for Gaia.com and other places around the internet, and so you can look for me there. I have a contact on my website and on my blog. If people want to get in touch with me, they're welcome to do that too.
Robert, I want to thank you ever so much for joining us. Always a great pleasure talking to you. And please don't be a stranger. Drop by and see us again.
Thank you, Rob. It was wonderful to be here, and I'll do that.
You take care, my friend. Exonation Robert Kopecky has been my guest this hour. www.robertkopecky.com, and his blog spot is robertkopecky.blogspot.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell from our broadcast center in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com.
Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world.
Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com, or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.